Well, you know, Jesus said that the New Testament can be reduced to just two little sentences. Love God is the first, and the other is love your neighbour. And Jesus said the two were very like each other. And I said, this is how you love your neighbour in the 21st century. You look after your neighbour's water, you look after your neighbour's land and food supply, you look after the air that your neighbour's children breathe. I said, that's loving your neighbour in the 21st century. I had an idea that the environment, climate change, and the state of the planet was an incredibly important issue for Christians, and even more so for a group like the Oblates at this time, and for all religious particularly in the country, because it wasn't being addressed in Ireland, and certainly it wasn't on the mind of the church at all, the environment. And I had a sense that this was the moral issue of our time. So I was asked to go to California for something, I remember, shortly after that to see somebody who was out there. And I met Thomas Berry for the first time. That's when I got his book. It's quite a difficult book, quite a philosophical book. It's creation and something. But anyway, I was attracted. I wanted to know more about this man. So I came back. I was wondering was there anyone else involved or anything? And after a few years, the Mercies emerged as a group that were very involved. And somebody told me that the Mercies had discovered this program called Be the Change, and we're about to do the training to become facilitators with the program. They'll go to England to do the training. So I said, keep me posted. So they came back very enthusiastic. I went to the program that they were running. It was a full day, I think, a full day's program, and I was hooked. And I did the training, and it's a life-changing program, really. And it was life-changing for me in that it gave me an insight into the science of what we were talking about, which was the area I knew would be the most difficult to get a handle on as a non-specialist, you know, and not a scientist. But this was a very easy way to get a global kind of insight into the science behind what was happening and what solutions might look like and all that kind of thing, what the problem was. There were a number of key inspirational figures behind Be the Change, particularly Thomas Berry. Thomas Berry is kind of the philosophical, I suppose, and theological spirit that dominates the Be the Change program. Cosmologists like Brian Swim and poet, there's a wonderful poet part of, and a number of scientists, you know. But Thomas Berry is there, and Thomas Berry, there's a man in Ireland, a Columban, who was a student of Thomas Berry, that's Sean McDonough, and he's another man who's made a fantastic contribution in this field. And his books are also not so easy to read, but they're very well worthwhile struggling with to understand issues like climate change and understand exactly what we're talking about. And of course, there are other ones like John Feehan, you know, who's coming from slightly different from geology, but also from botany and from the, agriculture really, and horticulture and plant life. And these people have been tremendously influential, as is a climate scientist like John Sweeney. They have been incredibly formative in the heart of the movement here in Ireland. There's a young woman at the moment also who's very involved called Lorna Gold, a young mother who's another influential figure and has written a very nice book. One of the things that's always struck me, just from a point of view of a pastor and a priest, is that the people who have the biggest stake of all on this question of climate change and the health of our planet are the young parents of young children. People who are open enough, but also whose concern for their children and their children's children can easily tap into that, because that's genuine and real. And as they look at their children and look at the life that their children are going to have into the future, and the concerns that they're going to have to live with, I think that's something very powerful. It's not to frighten people, but it's to light a bit of a fire under a lot of people. There's a lot of people in that category that don't come to church because church doesn't light the fire under them. But there is a fire to be lit, and I think it's around the environment. But again, not in a global sense, because if you talk about the environment in a too global of a sense without getting down to specifics, it becomes a bit of a cliche today. Everybody is giving a nod to the environment, but get into the guts of it. Get into the guts of it and begin to connect. I think the Pope is always saying that. Get the connections going. Get people to recognize the connection between what they do, what's been done at their job, what to make their living at, and possibly detrimental impacts on life for the future. Well, the mission development has kind of, you would say, two lines of funding. One is from the oblates, or the money we collect, parishes or that. And that can come for particular things, or it can, in a general way, support the mission of the oblates in the world. But there's another line of funding that we get, and it's for development. And the most important funding priority now for development, for our funder, is the environment. So any project, nearly every project must have something in it that's about sustainability. That's not financial sustainability. It's sustainability in terms of everything it does is protective of the environment. The energy it uses, the waste it produces, everything, has to be looked at from its impact on the environment. So some of the really interesting projects there, we had a project going in Indonesia again, where our man in Indonesia had an insight. He saw others trying to do it, of course. He wasn't original, but he saw a better way of doing this project. And he saw a huge potential in the sediment running off from hills, because the uplands had been damaged by taking away the trees. You know this from Sri Lanka, from so many places where this has happened, where land is lost in the uplands and becomes a problem in the lowland. It becomes a problem for the waterways and ultimately for the ocean as well. As sediment flows into the sea, clogs up things, also destroys lagoons where there are fish nurseries, natural fish nurseries and that going on, and also damages the mangroves and all that sort of thing. So he saw the potential for capturing this sediment on land that was flooded, capturing it and building up the land and creating new farmland, new viable farmland. This is a very fertile country. Volcanic sediment is very fertile. It's very incredibly fertile. It can produce a number of crops every year, for quite a while. Yeah, you still have to look after the soil. But we looked for funding for this project. But the funder wisely said to us, we like the project, but first you have to do an environmental impact study to make sure that you're not doing more harm than good. It's the way we have to look at everything today. So they gave us the money to do that study. And we got an engineer who had been on a previous project that failed, but he knew a lot about, he was able to piggyback on a lot of earlier research that he was involved in. And he did a study for us, an up-to-date study. And based on that, we were able to get the funding on condition that the recommendations in the environmental impact study would be taken on board, So that project is up and running. He was able to lay the infrastructure to get an enormous amount of sediment onto a very big area of land. We began with 450 hectares and then multiplied that. So now there's something like 1,500 hectares, involved. So that's quite a lot of land, produces quite a lot of rice and bananas or whatever. Oranges is another thing that they produce. Nobody is allowed in Indonesia, that's the country where it is, nobody is allowed to own, no farm family is allowed to own more than 2 hectares. So people get 2 hectares of land. Because farming is all done manually by hand, there's very little machinery, it's just very basic to do everything by hand. 2 hectares is quite a lot of land when you have to manage it that way, and it's labour intensive. So it's hard work. But the people, now also that project has generated further thinking, has engaged the government. The government have put a small research station on part of this land so that they can look after the soil and see what works and what doesn't work. And everyone is learning. There's a university, the agricultural science department of a major university is very involved, sends students there to always sampling the soil and, quantifying the production and all that kind of thing, and tracking it, tracking loss of production. If there's loss of production, why it happened and how it can be counted, and, and what else they need to put into the mix. So it's a very good. I was in Inchicore today. I was with these people who provide the fund today, and they made awards to projects, environmental projects. That's one of the projects. That's what we do. That's the kind of stuff, the JPIC angle that we take in the Mission Development Office, in our work in this office. For example, we have supported small mission hospitals with vital projects, like a mission hospital which had an appalling maternity service, you know. So we were able to get the funding together and get the people together on the ground to create a superb maternity unit in a small mission hospital. When our funder, Inchicore, went to see it, the woman who went to see was a midwife herself. I was talking to her today. She's left Inchicore years ago. But she said to me, she never saw anything like that. She never saw a project. Now, you wouldn't be doing that every place. You do it, this can be done. Mick Bracken, who's in Africa, he came with me. He said, I never saw this in Africa before. I never saw anything like this achieved, you know. So at a very modest cost. So we were able to do that. We were also able to back it up with a good laboratory, you know, and sticking with the one project for a while, you know, to make. And the idea is to create a little bit of excellence. So people can see this is a standard you can reach. It doesn't actually cost the earth. It can be done. And this is what your government should be doing with its resources, with your tax, with your contribution. And you shouldn't accept less of your politicians. That's the so every project like that we do, all the stakeholders have to be involved. Government departments, local government departments, chieftains, the head people. We have to have women as well as men involved. You know, some of them would like to leave out the women because of cultural issues and that. So that's not on. Children, where relevant, also have to have a voice. You know, so again, it's not to change, not to go in and do what a country should be doing for itself. It's to do something and say, this is possible, and you do it. Yeah, well, I would say it's very important to be rooted in a group. You know, to have a group who's actually active in justice work and integrity of creation work. You know, who are, to look on it as a kind of an ideas thing alone is not going to work. You know, you have to be engaged in it. I think, and you have to be engaged with other people, I think.
Oh, I think that's so important.
I think that without that rootedness, you know, it's just talk, it's more talk, you know, and that's the danger, that it becomes a talk shop. I think you're on a winner if you're talking about what you're doing, you know, and you're talking about what your group are doing. And I think that we could have done a lot more. We were doing a little bit too much doing without too little talking, if you know what I mean. And it's possible to make that mistake too. But today there's great ways. I think like a blog would have been a great idea, you know, or even a Twitter account, you know, any of these, or a social or a Facebook account, and get a lot of people interested in what you're doing. Be doing something that's interesting, but be really doing it, you know. And I think that would be a winner. I think there's a lot of people on the internet who seem to me to be wired into nothing, you know. If you're doing something and engaged, you have something to say. If you have a blog, you have something that's original. Yeah. There's no point in saying what somebody else said, but to speak from your own experience, it changes everything, you know, and it gives your voice a little bit of authority. Yeah, and I think that's reality behind it. It'll be credible. Your voice will be credible. So, and I thoroughly agree with Agnes that, you know, looking after the soul of the people who are engaged in JPIC is very important. You know, so time, reflection, thinking is very, very important.